Before we jump into this interview with Chris Mann, I wanted to make a couple of quick announcements. For the last couple of years, I've been highlighting my concerns and frustrations about how many of these recruitment firms and recruiters are treating public sector executive candidates like you poorly. And in the process of putting a spotlight on some of these recruitment firms and these recruiters that are treating you poorly, many of you have reached out to me to express your frustrations about how you've been treated. But unlike you, I have a platform and the freedom to communicate these frustrations now. And many of you do not feel comfortable voicing these frustrations because there's really no mechanism for you to voice it. And you don't want to put your name on it publicly because you do not want to be blackballed for a future recruitment. When I started the American Association of Municipal Executives, one of the key tenets that I wanted to focus on was advocating on behalf of you, the public sector executive. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by building a directory that allows our members to leave ratings and reviews of the recruitment firms and the recruiters so that there can actually be a vehicle for you to communicate your frustrations and concerns. Up until now, nobody has given any weight or consideration to you, the executive. The only interaction has been between the city or county that's hired the recruitment firm and the recruitment firm that wants to please its paying customer. However, you, the candidate, are basically ignored in this entire process. By creating this directory where you can rate and review these recruitment firms and recruiters, we are going to start positively impacting how these recruiters treat you. And we're going to start influencing how the governing bodies start picking the recruitment firms that they want to work with. Make no mistake, once we start getting these reviews on the ratings on the platform from the various candidates who've gone through these processes, HR directors and elected officials are going to be evaluating and weighing the feedback that is put on that platform. Make no mistake about it. And we are going to proactively engage the HR directors and the governing body members to let them know that there is this platform in place that is reviewing and analyzing the various recruitment firms that they're considering. Remember, guys, I do a weekly scan and look at all the cities and counties that are going to be doing a recruitment for a new manager. So we are going to start inserting ourselves into that process and making sure that your voices are heard and considered when they are making a final decision on these recruitment firms. And I guarantee you, we are going to start costing some of these firms who are treating you poorly a lot of money. And when you start costing businesses money, they are forced to change their behavior. And that's all we want. I want every recruitment firm to get high marks and a high score. That is my goal. That is my dream because that means they are treating you right. And that is the ultimate goal for the American Association of Municipal Executives with respect to this project. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be putting that website, that directory out here, hopefully in the next month or so. And I'm looking forward to your feedback on that. Second, I'm going to be attending the Texas Municipal League Conference here in October, the latter part of October in Fort Worth. So if you are a Texas city manager, an ACM, if you're going to be attending that conference and you'd like to meet up, you'd like to get lunch, or you'd like to hang out for dinner or something, please let me know. I'm going to be taking my podcast equipment down there, so I'd like to do some interviews if at all possible. My ticket to the exhibitor hall is being generously provided to me by Clear Career Professionals. They're going to allow me to hang out their table. So if you are walking the exhibitor hall, come over to Clear Career Professionals, say hi. And I'm looking forward to meet a lot of you guys I've never met before, and I'm looking forward to reconnecting to those of you I have met in the past. So really looking forward to that. Really excited to see you guys there. Please get in touch. Let me know if you're going to be attending. Now on to the episode with Chris Mann. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Chris Mann. He graciously invited me to be a guest on his podcast when he was the city manager in the city of Yucaipa. He launched his own city podcast there, and we're going to unpack that here in this episode. He's also got his own local government podcast that he started once he left the city of Yucaipa called Gov 360, and he's been plowing on along with that. So welcome to the show, Chris. Why don't you quickly give a little background and to the audience so they know what you're about and how you got into the local government space, because you did not go the traditional route.
I did not. No. Hey, Joe. Great to be here. I've been a fan of City Manager Unfiltered since the beginning, and the work that you've done here has really been inspirational to me, and was one of the reasons why we started Gov 360 a few months ago. And you've been a huge help there, so thank you so much for that. But look, I'm like you. I'm passionate about the city management profession. Becoming a city manager was a very long held career goal of mine. For that goal was first realized for me in 2019 when I became the city manager in Canyon Lake. And like you, I came to the profession from an unconventional route, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you and I both share politics in our background.
Yeah,
Right?
we both ran the same circles, right?
Yeah, that's right. We did. So you and I have known each other for quite a long time. And so when I became a city manager, I just threw myself all in to the profession. And it's a tough time to be in local government, whether you're a city manager or whatever position you hold within local government. And I think there's such a need for platforms like this to not just get information out and talk about best practices, but to form a support network for people in local government. That's so critical right now. But yeah, no, I have a pretty varied professional background. Came to it through the private sector primarily. Most of my career was running public affairs and public relations firm. I had my own firm for about 13 years and worked for another PR firm before founding my company. But I had a taste of local government early in life. I was a city council member and mayor in my 20s in the city of Westlake Village, California, which is in LA County, and just fell in love with local government, just the tangible nature of local government. I remember one of the first times that I really got hooked was over a park project. And there was a controversial piece of land. There were development ideas for it. City eventually ended up deciding to build a park there. Voted to build that park, and 18 months later, there were families and kids playing on that park, and kids on the swings. And man, that had an impact on me at a young
Yeah.
age, and just got hooked on federal government, state government. Important work goes on there too, but it's just not as tangible,
It's so
right?
far removed, right, from the daily life of the people that you work for in many
It,
ways.
it is. It is. So I served on the city council, served as mayor in my 20s. Then I had to figure out what to do with my life.
Yeah.
So I went to work in public affairs and public relations, and did a lot of land use entitlement work, did a lot of nonprofit work and political work, started a political action committee that became the largest non-union, related PAC in Riverside and San Bernardino counties in California. We were spending
Yep.
$400,000 most cycles. One cycle did like 1.2 million. So that helped me build a lot of relationships
Mm-hmm.
with elected officials in the region. I stayed close to government. I did a stint working for the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County. I was an analyst and the deputy chief of staff for a member of the Board of
We worked on the
Supervisors.
same floor.
We did. That's
Different
another
times, different
different
timing though. We
another
worked at the same
connection.
time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
worked on the same floor.
I
So
got to know your former boss Neil Derry quite well,
yeah.
and so and then I've done a couple stints on two different water boards over the years. And so I kept that connection to local government, even in my private sector career. But it was during my time with the Board of Supervisors, actually, that I came to the realization that I wanted to be a city manager someday. Working with the cities in that district and the city managers, seeing the ability to make real impact,
Right.
probably more so than in any other position in government that I could think of. The work that
Agreed.
elected officials do is important, it's noble, but on a 5-member council, you're one of 5.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a state legislature or Congress, you're one of hundreds. you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, just the ability to actually enact change to affect the future of what a community will look like, that's intoxicating to me.
Yeah, it's pretty
And
powerful stuff. It's pretty
it
amazing when
is.
you can actually point something like to that. You alluded to it earlier when you're elected official, but it still applies as a city manager when you can point to a park that got built and said, I was involved in that, right? Or you
Yeah.
can point to a project and say, I was instrumental in making sure that that happened. It's,
Mhm.
I've said it before and I'll say it again because, Chris, sometimes I feel like I run the risk or I become like the grim reaper or the patron saint of like all things that are wrong with city management, and because I sort of carved out that niche as sort of being the Paul Revere maybe of the profession, I can come off maybe overly negative or pessimistic. So I do try to, when the opportunity presents itself, I do try to remind folks that, man, I love this career path, and I love the fact that I've said before in the Daniel Rosemond series of interviews that I did back when I very first launched the podcast 2 years ago, that I've never experienced the highs or the fulfillment that I've gotten from being in this position and being able to make a difference, a tangible impact on the lives of people, or impacting the quality of the government services that are being provided, or making the organization itself more efficient, and and defending the taxpayers and protecting the taxpayers, which I've it's very sacrosanct to me. So yeah, I mean, there's just so much you can do, and I do tell people all the time though, this job is so challenging and it's so difficult that, well, I get a lot of people who will ask me, Chris, like, they're aspiring city managers, and
Mhm.
they'll ask for some feedback or questions. And one of the first things I always ask them is, well, why do you want to be a city manager?
Yeah.
And I usually get of some variant of I want to help people and I want to make a difference and that whole deal.
Wrong
And
answer.
I push back on that,
Yeah.
because you can do that with any position.
Yeah.
And you need to do it as a department head, right? You can do that in a lot of different roles. So I think there's going to be more to it, because at the end of the day, when you are the punching bag for 5 different individuals, or for thousands of residents or various different stakeholder groups, you gotta draw upon something more than, I just want to help people and make a difference, because you can do that in any number of roles. And so
Mhm.
I don't want to get off on a sidetrack or a tangent here conversation, Chris, but to me it's like, if you are really committed to the idea of wanting to be a city manager, I think you need to do a gut check and really evaluate what is the motivation behind the pursuit of this career, this
Yeah.
title, or and what have you. So
Yeah. That I have that conversation a lot actually. People come and they want to uh, talk about how they can, what steps they can take to eventually be in the city manager's chair. And I ask the same question. The first question is, why do you want the job? And it is surprising to me how often that question stumps people, right?
yeah,
And I think for a lot of people, if you've been in local government, most of your career, and you've worked your way up the ladder, and you're a department head or an ACM, it's just kind of the next logical step in your head. Well,
of
it's
course.
that's and sure, the salary's a little better, and what benefits and whatnot in the contract usually. But I have the conversation about the why, but also I have the conversation about making sure that you're ready for the position, both emotionally, mentally, but financially,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's very important because one of the things I've learned is you have to be able to lead from a position of strength, not a position of fear.
Hmm.
And you cannot be effective if you're running scared and you're afraid of getting fired, right? You have to do the job in a way that you are not afraid of walking away if you have to. And if you're in a position where getting fired or walking away becomes a tremendous hardship on your family, then you're not ready to step into the role, right?
No.
When you're in that position, that's when people do things that ordinarily they wouldn't do, right?
Yeah, they're going to compromise it. There's a decent chance they might compromise in some way.
Yes,
And it does,
yes,
and I'm not even saying anything even as far as ethics, right? I'm not even saying compromise your ethics, right? There's going to be the potentiality for you to compromise on whatever these lines in the sand that you have as an executive when it comes to how you're treated or how you're interacting with your governing body, right? And I
mhm,
think
yeah,
too often when you are fearful and legitimately fearful of the ramifications of losing your job, then you're gonna acquiesce in some ways that you probably would not normally acquiesce if you didn't have those same concerns. You
yeah,
know,
100%.
I will say this too, Chris. I will say this too. If we're being intellectually honest and fair, um, if you are financially secure or you have some reserves or the wherewithal to withstand a termination, there's also a decent chance that you might go the other way and maybe be a little bit too rigid and not compromise because you just don't feel like you have to, right? So I mean, there's always a fine line and a balancing act.
There is. I mean, look, nobody wants to get fired though, right? I mean,
Correct.
it's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing, even though it's so common in the profession that I mean, really it's unless you did something terribly wrong, there's really no reason for embarrassment, right?
No, but there's
But
still a stigma. We talk about this all the time. There's still
sure.
a stigma.
Yep. But no one wants to be in that position. So I think most city managers work hard to prevent that from happening if they can. You
Yep.
want to keep your councils
Agreed.
happy,
It's only
right?
common sense, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
But you never know what happens when egos get involved. We all have our egos. I have a healthy ego. Things
yeah,
happen. Things get
yeah,
done or said, and sometimes you can't walk back from certain things if you put
yeah.
yourself out there and you lock yourself or box yourself into a position, which can happen,
They
obviously.
can. No, true.
But anyway, be that as it may, Chris. So I was a guest on your podcast for the city of
Yeah,
Ukaipa, and it's
yeah.
I don't know when this episode is going to air. We are recording this in mid September,
Hmm.
and I don't honestly know when this episode is going to air, but it you know basically about a year ago in December is when you invited me down
Yeah.
to be on the show. Me and Will Coble is the Calamasa city manager. We tag teamed the episode with you. You graciously invited us on. We had a fun time. I thought I was going to have you much on here much sooner. My 2025 has been pretty hectic and crazy, as sort of
Yes.
as your
Yes.
2025 has been pretty hectic and crazy for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here we are. So in the months that we've reconnected and I've been on the show and everything like that, we've had some various conversations about items, and I wanted to bring you on to talk in this particular episode more in depth about your podcasting journey as a city manager on behalf of a community, right? As a city manager in your personal capacity. And then I also want to delve into some of the aspects of the funding sources that you used to set up your podcast in Ukaipa, right?
Yeah.
So the first order of business I want to tackle with you, Chris, is, and I think I kind of know, and I can just based off of knowing your personal past history with your work and being in public relations, but why don't you articulate for me what the motivation was for you to set up a podcast in Ukaipa, and how did that whole thing
Hmm.
even come about?
Yeah. By accident, really.
Oh, it was
Yeah. So, I'm doing Gov 360 now, and that was very intentional. And it came
right.
from my experience doing Ukaipa 360. But Ukaipa 360, we just kind of fell into. And, I've got a PR background. There are a lot of communications to that. And so I've got, having a communications background is something I think I'm maybe more comfortable with than a lot of city managers. I think as a profession, we tend to be very risk averse.
Hmm.
And I think it's not comfortable for a lot of city managers to kind of put themselves out front like that. Also, it depends an awful lot on your council because you want to be careful not to upstage your city council, right? And if you have council members who really like being in the limelight and being out front, you have to be cognizant of that, making sure they're getting those opportunities as well. But in Ukaipa, we were dealing with a lot of big issues. The city was running a very large deficit that I inherited. We were working hard to correct that deficit. And it was very clear to me that the city had been less than fully transparent with people about the budget up until I got there. The community, as a result, did not understand the difficult financial position the city was in. Everyone in the community had bought into a narrative that Ukaipa was one of the best run cities, most fiscally sound cities. Even declared by one publication as at one point as the least likely city in California to ever declare bankruptcy. But there was a lot going on beneath the surface.
And let me step on you here real quick, Chris, because I
Yeah.
don't know if we've communicated this before, but my audience is probably not going to know is that you are actually before you took the job, while you
Mm.
were employed there as a city manager, and still
Mm.
to this day,
Mm.
you are and were and am a resident of the city of Ukaipa.
Yes.
You are a
Yeah.
taxpayer in the city of Ukaipa. So I want to make
Yeah.
that very clear.
No, it was a unique opportunity. So I was managing the city of Canyon Lake. Before I was ever a city manager, I was very involved in politics. I was on and serving as president of the board of directors of the Ukaipa Valley Water District, which covers the cities of Ukaipa and Calamasa and some of the unincorporated area. And as a result, I knew all of the elected officials in the area. You go to functions, you're working collaboratively on projects, and so I had personal relationships with I think 4 of the 5 members of the Ukaipa City Council at that time, and they were preparing to make a change in their city manager position, and they reached out knowing that I was a city manager who lived in town and said, would if an opening occurs, would you be interested?
Yeah.
It's hard to. I was very happy in Canyon Lake. That's a whole nother story that we could go over. The things we did in Canyon Lake to really turn that city around. I was very comfortable there, but the opportunity to manage the town where I lived was just too hard to pass up. And living in a town, you're driving around and as a city manager living in a city that you're not managing, it can be frustrating. You drive around town, you see things you're like, oh man, I wish I could fix that.
Yeah.
And Ukaipa homelessness was a big one. We're just seeing homelessness increase exponentially and thinking, what is the city doing about this? Right. And that could be a completely different conversation we have too, because we found a strategy that reduced homelessness by over 80% in less than 2 years in Ukaipa. But yeah, so I was a resident of Ukaipa, had the opportunity to go and manage there, and had a 4-minute commute from my house to the office, which
I was just gonna say that. I didn't want to step on you again, but I'm glad you brought that up because I say if you don't know SoCal geography, Canyon Lake is not a 4-minute commute. That's what was your commute when you're going back and forth to Ukaipa?
about an hour, just over an hour.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
each way. Yeah. So I mean, in Ukaipa, I could literally see my house from the window of my office. It was a little off in the distance, but I could see it.
That's amazing.
I've never had that before. Probably never have it again, but I enjoyed it while it lasted. It was we were grappling with these big issues in town, and I felt the need to educate the community on the truth about the budget. And Joe, I'll never understand why so many government agencies are hesitant to be just completely transparent and open book on things like budget challenges. Maybe it's human nature to always want to put our best foot forward,
Yeah.
and not to come under criticism. But that's when you really get in trouble, right? I think for most people, they will understand and be more willing to take the steps that need to be taken if the facts are presented to them in an open way, right?
I think Chris, honestly, if we're gonna think about this issue a little bit, it can be it's a pretty vexing situation. And sometimes it requires a new city manager to come in and sort of reorientate the framework, right? The mindset of looking at something. Because when you are in the role of city manager and you have a council, there are competing issues or factors at play, right? On one
Mhm.
hand, you don't want to show up or embarrass or put your governing body in a negative light. Um, who's truly taking ownership over a budget? It's kind of fascinating because I'll read articles sometimes where the headline is, city manager's budget calls for a tax increase, right? And it's like yes and no, because it's like, well, the reason why the tax increase is being called for is because the council wants certain policies and services to be provided. That they're the ones that set that agenda, right, and ratify that. So is it really the city manager's budget? You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of issues with respect to when you shine negative light onto things that are happening. There's concerns that people are going to either be attacked politically or professionally, and that there could be some fallout from that. And so you get this sort of, it's kind of like 50 years ago it seemed like, when, or maybe, geez, maybe a little longer now because I'm 48, but no family ever put their dirty laundry out in public, right? It was just like, everyone just sort of had in public, everyone had the smiley face and everything was great, but behind
Mhm.
closed doors you didn't know what the hell was going on, right? And now it's like, I think it's kind of like that with government in a lot of respects. I don't think city managers necessarily always want to call out their elected officials or call out budget issues, because you just alluded to it 5 minutes ago, right? If you are concerned about losing your job or embarrassing elected officials, or maybe highlighting something that's not politically palatable, there's ramifications for that. And I'm not
There
speaking about Ukaipa specifically, Chris, but I will tell you, just about talking about California in general, right? Because I tell people, when I left from California and came to Kansas, you literally have to almost like, a dog catcher, go and lasso people and get them to sign up to run for council in small towns in Kansas. They just don't want to do it in a lot of places.
Mhm.
It's truly a thankless job. You get paid nothing for it, maybe $50 a meeting. And I said, but in California, for a lot of places, I mean, you got a lot of council members that would run over their grandma and stab their mom in the back to be an elected official on a city council seat in California. It's a whole different ball game. And
Yeah.
you alluded to the PAC work that you're doing, raising a lot of money. I tell people about some of the election cycles I've been through. When you have a county assessor who's spending $2 million to get elected in a county assessor seat, it blows people's minds. They can't even wrap their head around that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
it's just a different ball game. I guess that's a long way of saying that I think a lot of the bad news gets covered up because everyone's afraid of how it's going to be perceived and what the fault's going to be when it gets out there.
Yeah, but it's always the cover up that gets you in trouble,
Of
right?
course.
I mean, I think people are very understanding and forgiving if you're just upfront about things. And it's not just about budget. It's kind of across the board. I've dealt with developers, who are facing all kinds of issues, and they come in on their project and they're complaining about, some roadblock they hit that they think is ridiculous, and they come in ready for battle, expecting you to push back. And if you look at it, oftentimes they've got a good point. There are processes that could be streamlined. There are roadblocks that are unnecessary, and in those situations, I've often said, man, you're right. Our process here is not ideal. It needs to be streamlined. We're going to work on fixing that. And it's very disarming. They don't expect it. Like, oh, okay, well, great. Thank you. And
I get in trouble for this, Chris. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to alienate people. To come full circle, a second ago, I said, what's your purpose for wanting to be a city manager?
yeah.
And I've said on this podcast numerous times, my purpose for wanting to become a city manager was to effectuate real substantive change and to attack things that I felt were, negative impressions or perceptions I had about local government throughout my life growing up. Right. I've always been a limited government conservative. I don't hide it. I don't try to turn this into a political podcast by any stretch of the imagination, but I got to be intellectually honest with the audience. And so for me, the allure of becoming a city manager was the idea of, okay, how do I make government more efficient, more innovative, more responsive to the business community, being a good steward of the taxpayers' funds? And that's what brought me into this universe, right? And to be frank, and I know some people are going to get upset when I say this, but I think it's the truth. There are too many organizations throughout this country where they just don't give a shit what is going on with the business community, and they're going to jump through the hoops because these are the hoops they have to jump through, and they don't have to like it, but they're going to do it, and we're not going to do a damn thing about to change it. And I think that's the wrong mindset with government. And so you got a lot of these developers, and admittedly, the developers you're dealing with are also dealing with much larger organizations and counties
Mhm,
throughout the Southern
mhm.
California region, right? You got LA County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, Orange County, to name the big ones. And those are pretty big monsters when it comes to bureaucracy. So I think they have this natural bowed up defensive posture. And you're right. Sometimes when you just act like a human being and say, you know what, yeah, we probably could do better here, you're going to get a better response.
Yeah, maybe having been on the other side of the counter, it's helpful to me here. I think a lot of times people think about developers as, greedy and having deep pockets and just taking without giving. And maybe sometimes that's true, but I think more often than not, they're trying to do the best they can, and it's a challenging position that they're in. It's a very risky business. They're deciding where to invest, and we want their investments in our communities,
Right.
but they're dealing with some difficult restrictions as well. Most developers can't afford to just self fund all of their projects and just pull that money out of their savings accounts, right? They're dealing with lenders, they're dealing with investors, and those investors need to see certain returns, and there's all kinds of different matrix that are involved with the lending of money. And so you can put together deals with developers that provide tremendous community benefit. But if you push it too far, it does get to a point where their projects no longer become fundable, right?
Yes. They have to make a profit to make it all worthwhile.
Right. They're not in this for charity, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, if done right, you should be getting community benefits, out of projects, right? But understanding that there is a need to be business friendly. You, as a city, you're competing for those investments with other cities in the region, so you want to have a reputation of being a place that's business friendly, where the processes are streamlined, or at least not going to put unnecessary hurdles in your way. I found that most developers can stomach almost anything you ask of them, if they know the process is going to be smooth, and there are no surprises. If they know what to
Yes.
budget for and what to put in their performance up front, most reasonable things that you ask of them, they're going to be willing and able to accommodate.
It's those unexpected surprises that really cause doom and gloom. And I would just remind all the executives who are listening, and maybe aspiring executives who are listening, there needs to be an understanding of what carrying costs are and what that risk exposure is for these large development projects. The monthly cost of carrying a project, people think, oh, it's just a month delay. No, no, those months add up to, depending on the size and scope of the project, can add up to tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars if you are not careful. And so, yeah, you're right. It goes back to what you said. Have a smooth process, right? outline all the costs and hurdles and the things up front, so they're not getting sandbagged or ambushed on the back end, and they can make the calculations and pencil it out and see if it works or not. But man, when you really get them into the process and then you trip them up and you pull the rug out from under them and give them some surprises, that's just not a good way to do business. So
No. So we've gotten a little off topic here. The original question was, how do we get into starting UKIPA 360? So let me get back to that. So we were dealing with all these challenges, budget challenges, and we had worked to put together a plan for fixing, our budget deficit. And it was imagine a puzzle with different pieces. There was, the problem was so big, there was no one thing that was going to solve the problem. We were dealing with depending on how you looked at it, $7 or $8 million deficit, right? And so, yes, we proposed a 1% sales tax measure. We were able to get that across the finish line, which was huge. The city
especially
had tried
the city of Yucaipa. That's a
conservative city politically.
Yes.
They had tried 4 years before with a half-cent measure, and I think only got like 40% of the vote. So I'm very proud of the work we did there. We did a full 1 cent measure. It got just over 60% of the vote in Yucaipa. And Joe, the difference was we were transparent. We spent a lot of time explaining the truth about the city's financial situation and how the city got itself into that situation, right? And so the sales tax measure was part of the puzzle. We renegotiated a number of our agreements, including our trash line contract. We increased the franchise fee that flows to the city there significantly. And that's really what identifies the beginning of our journey towards the podcast, because we had sent out information, but were accused of not being transparent on that topic, which really hit me hard because it's something I
you're a communications guy.
Right. What do you mean? So we then over communicated on it. We put out more information. We did a video. I did just a camera with me sitting at my desk explaining the situation. We put graphics up there. We, did this video, and man, the reaction just surprised all of us. Right. So we thought, okay, well, maybe this is a good format. So then we did a full length, like a 15, 20-minute informational video that covered the whole history of how the city got into the financial situation it got into and what the potential solutions were, and basically told the community, it's your choice. We cannot continue at these service levels without additional revenue. We can reduce service levels. That's fine. But if we want to maintain these service levels, here's what it's going to take in terms of revenue generation. And it's your choice, community. We're not going to advocate one way or the other. It's your choice. Right?
Yeah.
And it was powerful and it resonated. So the more we started doing these videos, I thought, okay, well, we're onto something here. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Video is how people are receiving and digesting information today. They're not reading the newspaper every day anymore. If you're lucky in your community, you have like a weekly local paper that maybe sometimes people read, but everything is social media now. YouTube is the new cable TV. More people are getting their news from YouTube now than any other platform, right? And not just to be on one platform. Too many cities say, well, I'm on Facebook or on social media. Okay, well, you're reaching one demographic. Your younger demographics aren't on Facebook. You got to be on Instagram. You got to be on TikTok, right? You got to be on YouTube. And so we started producing these videos, and I thought, why don't we start getting some equipment? It started slowly. We got some microphones. We got a audio interface. I thought, well, the lighting's not real good. Let's get some lights. So we got some lighting. I think, well, it'd be nice to have a more permanent place to film, because we would just set up in a conference room, and every time we recorded, we'd have to set everything up and take it all down again.
Sucks.
Right. And we'd be spending half a day of staff time doing that. And we identified an area within City Hall that we thought would be good for it. Kudos to the City Council. It had been the City Council shared office. They were willing to give that up because none of the members of the council were hardly ever using it. So, and it was great. It had no windows. It was easy to control the light, and the size was perfect. And Joe, before you knew it, we had a full-on podcast studio.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've been in there in person. That's great.
Yes.
It
was. I've never seen anything else like it in local government. It was a professional studio podcast. Podcast studio. It was. We had the acoustic wood paneling along the walls, and all the lighting set up in the microphones and just all the.
You guys won some awards for it too, didn't you?
I'm very proud of that. Yeah, we beginning of this year, CAPIO, which is the Association for Public Information Officers, awarded Ukaipa 360, essentially like best government podcast, which was huge. It was to get that Capio award was to have that recognition was special.
Yeah, you did. You
But
did it. You did a really good job on that. I want to unpack this a little bit more, if you don't mind. The decision to roll out the podcast.
yeah.
Did you seek council guidance and approval on that, or can you walk us through what how you navigated the potential pitfalls and minefields that would go with having that sort of a communication
Yeah.
medium?
We never went to council with a formal request, but obviously, and I was having conversations with council members. And
Right.
at that time in Ukaipa, the members of that council did not have a desire to be out front themselves. The mayor at the time would do an occasional video that we produced for him. We call it "Walk with the Mayor," and
Uh
he would
huh.
literally be on the streets of Ukaipa talking about an issue that was of interest to residents, answer questions that were commonly being
Right.
asked in the community. But aside from that, it was not a council that had the inclination to be on camera a lot. But there was still a need to get information out, right? And
Yeah.
so it just kind of fell to me. There was no one else inside the organization that really had the desire or skill set to do it. So I just kind of started doing it. And
So let me ask you this then. So as a communications person, in your prior life, and then you come to Ukaipa and you're a few years into your city manager career. This is your second stop at the time.
mhm.
What sort of guardrails or thought process did you have in mind? I guess what I'm trying to come at you with, Chris, is if I have other executives on the, listen to the show right now and they're thinking about doing a podcast, what would be your advice and counsel to them as far as how to navigate some of the risks that go with putting a podcast out there?
Yeah, you got to know your council. I mean, as with all things, right? You have to have the pulse of your council. I think a podcast could be an effective tool for most cities. Whether the city manager is the host of that podcast is a whole nother conversation. That's a something that you have to kind of look inward within your organization to decide does that make sense or not.
And also your
To be,
personality, right? The type of person you are as an executive.
yes, yeah, you got to be comfortable with that. I don't know that I would do it again, to be honest with you. Would I do another city podcast? Absolutely. Would I put myself in the position of being the host of the podcast? Probably not. Probably not. I would probably, have someone on staff or someone that is in the community that takes on that role. Now, would I make appearances on the podcast as the city manager? Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But that's going to vary from organization to organization, and from council to council, and from manager to manager. But I think the medium is incredibly effective. We did a long form podcast. One of the advantages, especially if you're in a community that is struggling with contention or kind of politically charged environments, I think nothing builds trust within a community, but between a community and their city leadership, more than that what feels like face to face, right?
That video
It,
connection, right? That
that
face to
that
face.
that
Yeah.
that that video connection. So I think one of the reasons why the long form podcasts, like Joe Rogan, are so successful and popular is that people don't feel like they're being fed canned sound bites.
Right. It's
There's
authentic,
real,
right? There's an authenticity
yeah,
there.
it's authentic, it's genuine. You get a real sense of the person's personality, who they are as a person, right? And so that was another goal too, is let's humanize the city staff. Let's let the community get to know, so often government's this kind of faceless machine, right?
Hmm.
And it's easy to hate the faceless machine who just takes
Of
our tax
course.
dollars, and you know there are issues in the community. And so I think there's tremendous value there. And then long form is interesting because most people aren't going to take the time to sit there and watch an hour and a half podcast.
That's a
uh,
lot. Yeah.
it is. Some will, if the topic's interesting enough to them. But what video then allows you to do is take small clips of that, right? And so then there's software out there that uses AI that puts this together for you in minutes. And you can have an hour-long podcast, and you end up with, a dozen 3-minute, 2-minute clips, that you can put out there on social media. It could be a story or a reel, and people do watch those. You get huge views on those. And then, if someone is interested, they may then click the link and go watch the full episode.
Right. Right.
So I do think it's a terribly effective medium. I would encourage more cities to consider doing it. And then it has to be up to you to decide, as a manager, how involved are you going to be?
I got a question for you. So you said that you probably wouldn't put yourself front and center again on a second iteration with, say, another city that you're working for in the future. Is that because you got some pushback from your governing body in Yucaipa at some point? Is that because you had maybe ran into some sort of pothole in the process? You're like, oh, maybe I need to step back. Was it more of, hey, just going back to what you said a second ago, I want to humanize my staff more than just me, and I think it'd be healthy for the whole organization if I get other voices out there? Or for fourth, the fourth option was doing podcasts are time consuming. So was it also just like, hey, it's a tough time investment because you got a lot of other stuff to do as a city manager? I'm kind of curious if you could unpack what was the rationale for why you would maybe approach it differently your next time out.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the things that you just mentioned, really. It is I underestimated the time commitment going in. And
Well, you went from 0 to 100, Chris. So you went
yeah.
from you went from oh, maybe I'll just do a podcast, an audio podcast, and now it's a professionally well done video podcast. I mean, it's great, but I mean that's a lot of work.
And I took pride in the production value. I mean, we were filming and broadcasting in 4K. I wanted the angles to be right. I wanted motion. With the editing, I wanted to use the Ken Burns effect, and you have the motion coming. The lighting had to be just right. I was going for a cinematic look, and it became a. But for those reasons that I think it ended up winning that Cappy Award.
Right.
The more engaging it is, the more effective it's going to be, right?
Yes.
At reaching people. And honestly, I took a look at when we were starting, we're doing our research and looked around at, other cities and counties that were doing podcasts. And to be honest with you, I really didn't see anything that jumped out at me as, okay, this is what we should be aiming for.
Yeah,
It
there was
was
just like I don't want to. We're not going to talk. I'm not talking about bad about anybody, but there's not like the city podcasts out there are known to be aesthetically pleasing or exciting to watch, right? I mean, that's just right. I
right.
mean,
Well, and that was, and the content too, it's tricky because as a city podcast, a lot of times the issues you're talking about, not only are they specific just to that city, so, you kind of limited ability to grow
your
interest in
audience.
that podcast outside the city,
Yeah.
but also the topics can be dry.
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, I mean, not many people want to sit there and listen to an hour discussion about the intricacies of municipal finance, or, all the nuts and bolts of putting together a freeway interchange expansion. It's
Isn't that the irony though, Chris? Because it's like, I've talked about this in numerous different venues, is one of the biggest things, and I've been guilty of this before I became a city manager. I was guilty of attacking local governments for not being transparent.
mhm,
I raised my hand. I've been guilty. I've done that, right? I used to be an activist. I've played that game, and I got to call balls and strikes and call myself out, right? And so we have this weird conundrum or juxtaposition, this weird reality where it's like so many residents want to attack government for being not transparent. But the reality is when we do try to be transparent, you don't always get the engagement. And like, I've said this time and time again, how many people show up to a budget meeting? Usually next to zero, right? And it's just like,
right,
well, we're not
right,
hiding anything. These are all the dollars and cents right here. There's nothing being hid. Nobody's showing up. And it's like, if you do put an hour long video out on the hour long podcast out on the budget, how many people are going to listen to that?
right, right.
It's like,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah.
like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, I had a conversation on this very topic recently with Sam Tolles. Sam, we just recorded an episode with Sam. Sam was in California, um, uh, and doing work for a city out here, and so we took the opportunity to record in person, a Gov 360 episode. And one of the things we talked about was how to truly be transparent today, that looks different than it once did. And I really take exception to cities who they post something on the website, maybe some static thing on Facebook, and they say, "Well, when the information's out there, we've been transparent." It's how often do we hear, on a project that's been, controversial project that's been going on forever, and then it finally comes to the hearing, and there's always a handful of people that stand up and say, "Well, this is the first time I'm hearing about this," and it's so frustrating. And so often the city's response is, "Well, it was on our website."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, as if the tens of thousands of people that live in that city are expected to go and look at your website every week. That's not reality, right? So yes, we have to present the information. The hour long long form podcast is not the format for everybody, but again, I think it's those clips you can take from that are valuable, and you've got to find a way to package up small bits of information, preferably video. Capture a few minutes that will explain this issue and push it out over and over again. It is communication today is not the same as it was even a decade ago, and I think local government has been far too slow to adjust.
I would say this though, one of the advantages of putting out long form content, even if you're not getting, this is going to sound maybe a little wild to say, even if you're not getting tremendous viewership or listenership, right, is that if you develop a reputation as a city manager, as a governing, or as an organization, that you're putting out this content on a regular basis and you're going into the meat of it, right? Your long form content, even if people are not going to listen to those episodes or that specific episode, you do have the ability to demonstrate and change the perception of your populace, your residents, and say, hey, we are putting this stuff out there. And I think a lot of times what happens is it's not so much that the people who are paying the taxes and shuttling their kids back and forth between little league games or whatever, it's not that they actually want to sit down and break bread with all the content and be in the know of everything that's going on with the community, but they want to know or they want to feel or believe that everything's on the up and up, right? They don't
Right, right.
they don't want to have to feel like they got to chicken hawk everything the city's doing and check the work, right? Check the homework and make sure all the numbers are adding up. But if you're actually going through the effort of putting this content out there on a regular basis, whether it's a podcast or social other media hits and reels and town hall meetings or whatnot, you can convey a sense of, hey, my government's open. I don't need to be mistrustful. I don't need to be skeptical. I don't need to be looking over my shoulder as a taxpayer, right? I think
Right.
that's a very valuable message that you can send with a podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, no, that's true. The other valuable thing too is as issues come up in the community and people reach out and they have concerns about a topic. If you've done a podcast episode on that topic, it's great to be able to send them that link, right? Okay, well, yeah, that's check this out.
Yeah,
We've gone into this. If you want to do a deep dive on this, watch this video.
right.
That's helpful.
So hey, I want to turn to something because setting up a podcast studio, it's if you do it the way you did it, it's not super cheap to do. I think you invested in some pretty good equipment there,
Yeah.
and I had learned something through you that I thought many other city managers in California would find useful. I don't know how applicable this segment of the podcast is going to be to those outside the state of California, but why don't you unpack the revenue source that you use to set up your podcasting studio and maybe enlighten some of your colleagues in the Golden State to a revenue opportunity that might cover this expense.
Yeah, and to that point, this is something that's applicable nationwide. It's not just in California, but
Oh, it is.
yes, yeah, yeah,
I
no,
thought this was a state tax.
no, no. So 1984, there was the Cable Communications Policy Act, federal legislation, and it established franchise fees essentially for cable. So what this essentially is a franchise fee for cable television providers. So very similar to how you charge a franchise fee to your public utility, like in California. Here we have Southern California Edison, or could be like Verizon, your phone companies. These companies are laying cable in your streets in the public right of way, and you're giving them an exclusive to do that. And in return for that exclusive ability to lay that cable within the public right of way, they remit to the city a franchise fee. And the ability to do this was, the Cable Communications Policy Act of 1984 nationwide. Now, California did jump in, and not to be outdone, the California legislature wanted to get on the action. So in 2006, there was statewide legislation, the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act, which is called DIVCA. That was in 2006, and it didn't change much. I mean, it essentially just mirrored, what the federal legislation was. There are a couple of small nuanced differences, but nothing we really need to dive into here. What these legislations says was two things. They established a franchise fee that flows to the general fund of your city, but they also allow the city to charge up to 1% of the bill, the cable TV bill that the customer pays, and that money flows to the local government entity, right?
And does that go to a special like enterprise type fund that can only be used for specific purposes?
Yeah, yes, it's so we call those are called PEG funds. PEG. It stands for Public Educational and Governmental PEG funds, and they're it's very restrictive what you can spend it on. And I think the best illustration is it used to be very common where there were cable access channels, right? Cable
Yes.
TV access channels. Most cities communities had them. They're becoming less popular now, but they still exist. And so initially, these PEG funds funded these cable access TV stations. And the idea is it is a way to get information about local government out to the public, right?
Sure.
And so in some instances, these cable access channels were only government information going out. Some cities open them up to the public, where the public could reserve time and do shows,
Hmm.
and it had to be informational, and that information went out to the community. And these still exist. They're not as widely used as they once were. But now what a lot of cities are doing is that they'll broadcast their council meeting, for an example,
Right.
and then they'll push the council meeting out on the cable access TV channel, which very few people probably watch anymore. But they'll take that same feed and they'll live stream it, on YouTube or
Right.
Facebook or whatever. And then more people are seeing it that way today. But these PEG funds have to be used for getting informing the public, educational information about local government to the public, and it can only be used on the purchase of capital, right? It can't be used for services.
Like a
So,
subscription or something, like a software subscription, right? It can't be used for
correct,
that.
can't be used for that. The one caveat is if you purchase, let's say, a software program, and someone has to come and install that program and train your staff to use it. Those costs, although technically that's a service, they can be
Okay.
included in PEG, but it can't be ongoing. It can't be like, okay, now I've got a contract with this vendor and they're going to operate this equipment every council meeting.
Okay.
That's not an eligible
Yeah.
expense. Primarily, it's the purchase of capital. It can be cameras, lights, microphones. It could be, let's say you have to build out a studio. You have to erect walls, or acoustic
Yeah.
treatments.
Soundproofing. Yeah. All that.
Soundproof, all that qualifies. And so in Ukaipa, and I found this to be true for a lot of cities, people kind of forget about the PEG funds. It's so limited. Now, some cities have figured out, okay, I can use this to redo my council chambers, right? New audio video for the council chambers.
Yeah.
We have very high tech voting systems now, or the way multiple camera setups and the angle switch automatically, and all the
Based on who's talking, right, and all that. Yeah.
exactly. You can fund all of that with PEG. You could argue that let's say you want to redo the dais. Well, it's you could argue that's kind of like it's all part of getting the information out to the public. So I've seen cities use that money for not just the audio video equipment, but we're going to rebuild the dais.
Right.
TVs in the council chambers. And so all of that's PEG eligible. But you absolutely can build out a recording studio. As always, I recommend that people check with their city and city attorneys, county councils. There is a little bit of a gray area because these fees come from the cable TV providers, that there has to be a tie-in to cable TV. So some would, and this has not been litigated, but some attorneys would argue that you still need to be pushing this information out on cable access TV.
Okay.
Now you can also put it out on social media, wherever else you want to put it. But again, that hasn't been litigated. But if you're being conservative legally here, just kind of keep that in mind.
Well-
But it's a great resource. A lot of cities. So when I came to Ukaipa, I asked about the PEG funds. The city of Ukaipa was sitting on over $1 million of PEG funds,
No
and
kidding.
it was accumulating at a rate of about $100,000 a year. So we probably spent a little over $100,000 building out that podcast studio, and it was replenished initially the next year, and you just couldn't spend it fast enough, right? So I think the plan was eventually to do a city council chambers redo, and bring in all the new high tech,
Yeah.
audio video equipment. But it is a dwindling resource for a couple of reasons. One is that fewer and fewer people are paying for cable TV, and so just less people are paying in to the system. There was also a change that came out of case law a few years ago in California. As is often the case in California, the state legislature they just love to take control away from the local level, and so cable franchise agreements are no longer negotiated at the city level. That's all done in Sacramento now.
Okay.
Sacramento will negotiate that with the cable companies, and then that franchise fee revenue and the PEG funds still flow to the city. It just it's negotiated differently now. But there was a lawsuit. In addition to these franchise fees and PEG fees, very often cable TV companies were required to provide other benefits to the community. So, for example, it could be a requirement that they provide free service to the school district, right?
Right.
And so the lawsuit by the cable companies was, well, those expenses should count towards these franchise fees, and the court ruled in their favor. And so that just reduces the overall amount
The
of money in the
pool.
pot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the peg funds are dwindling. I would say take a look. You might be surprised that you've got a big pot of peg funds sitting there. Spend it wisely, because it's going to be replenished at a slower pace as time goes on. Council loves it because it's not general fund; it's restricted funds, and all of a sudden, they're seeing neat amenity for the community and a way to communicate to the community, and it doesn't take away from any of your other services.
Let me throw out an idea. We kind of bandied this around because I hit you up on this, but um, with the way the economy's changed, the way the information's changing, you have an influencer based economy, and there has some pros and cons as well. But I hit you with this idea about cities going out and either creating sort of influencer type studios or recording studios, either at a government facility or at the library or whatnot. Do you think that those funds could be used for such a purpose, whereas you're turning it over to the community and giving them a space where they can record their own sort of channel events or content?
Yeah, I actually love this idea. I think this is brilliant, and it's really not all that different from what a lot of cities did with the cable access channels,
Because those
right?
were open
Where
to the public too, right? Just like you kind of alluded to, right?
city by city, yeah,
Yeah.
some cities did made them open to the public, and some did not. I was on the city council in the city of Westlake Village many, many years ago. I was elected in 1999, but back then there was a very active cable TV channel in that area. And yeah, it was, there were time slots you could sign up for. There was a fee, and, got to use all their equipment. And once your show was done, it went out to the cable TV, the cable access channel. The public could view it. It is tricky. Again, you want to talk to your city attorneys on this, because I think the city's ability to control content is quite
Right.
limited
Right.
there, and so
Which could open up a can of worms.
you could, yeah, you could open yourself up to, there could be content being put out that is something you might not necessarily want to be put out there, and then the accusation is, the city is providing a platform for this terrible content, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I'd want to do a deeper dive on that side of it to see, are there controls and protections that could be put into place in terms of the content that's put out there. But in concept, I love it. I think
Yeah.
the more that we can get public, get information on local government out to the public, that's great. I've noticed recently there are private recording studios popping up all over the place. If you want
Like
to,
shared spaces, right? Essentially.
yeah, I mean, it's so someone creates a podcast studio with a table and the cameras and the lights and the
Hmm.
whole thing, and you can go in and, for $400 an hour or whatever it is, you can rent that space. And some of them also offer editing services. So if you want to if you have the funds and you just want to go and record, and then you don't have to worry about the equipment or the editing or any of it, and they'll, you can pay for that to be done. So that's becoming more and more popular. I suspect if you essentially offered that for free, or for not free, but for discounted government rate, your time slots would probably fill up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it'd be a pretty interesting resource, like you said. Giving people the opportunity to use technology that they might not have the resources to buy on their own, or they're not big enough or have the volume of content creation to justify that expense. But if you amortize it over many different individuals, whether it's people wanting to create their own news show or their own sort of TikTok content or whatever the case might be, I think it'd be pretty fascinating. We're moving to the age where there's democratization of news dissemination and information and things of that sort of nature. So just an idea. It's not my idea. I don't want to steal it. When you told me about the funding source, it triggered a thought in my head, because I talked to Doug Finch, who was the city manager for Duncanville, Texas at the time. He's not there now.
Mm.
He just recently departed. But in a conversation that him and I had, he was telling me that they had some plans to create a public sort of podcasting studio space or whatnot. And I just think that's a pretty interesting concept to give individuals in the community an opportunity to have their own sort of ability to create content and get the messaging out. Obviously, there's always going to be some what ifs and liabilities and some concerns and things taken to the extreme. But I mean, you can say the same thing about libraries, right? And whether or not people should be allowed to search for certain things on the internet or what have you, or what books are being purchased or magazines are being carried. But
True.
anyway,
True.
That'll do it for us today. Chris, I appreciate you being on the program. I know you're doing a lot of great work in the local government space when it comes to Gov 360 and setting the trend when it comes to, or setting the, I guess, the standard or the benchmark for when it comes to local governments and doing their own sort of podcast creation or, developing their own podcast. So great job on that, Chris. And
Well, thank you. I'd just
yeah,
like to say, if anyone listening to this and you might be interested in pursuing some a podcast or other type of video communications for your city, feel free to reach out to me. It's something I've become passionate about. I kind of geek out on the technical side of it, and so be happy to be a resource for you. LinkedIn's the best place to get me, and check out Gov 360 too. It's a whole different animal. When I left the city of Yucaipa, I had just really fallen in love with the podcast platform. And one of the things that surprised me was, how much attention the podcast got outside of the city of Yucaipa. And it was primarily from people who were in local government, who just kind of enjoyed, these local government discussions. And a lot of the topics we touched on were not just specific to the city of Yucaipa. We tried to have episodes that were just kind of broader explanations of how local government worked. So I felt there was a market and a need for more content just in the local government space and geared towards local government professionals
yeah,
specifically.
100%.
So Gov 360 is not intended, the audience isn't the general public. It is designed for those who are in the profession of local government. Also to kind of along the lines of what you're doing here with City Manager Unfiltered and with AAME, continuing to build a support network for those in the profession. And I love what you're doing. I think there's a need for much more of that. I listen to your podcast every time it comes out. The thing that makes me sad about your podcast is then I have to wait a whole another week for the next one.
You're too kind. Thank you, Chris. I did not pay him to say that.
So I think there's room for more content in the space, and
there definitely is, and I welcome more creators because I think we could definitely use more content and different perspectives, and you're one of those. And I'll link to your profile as well as the Go 360 podcast in the show notes so people can reach out and get in touch with you if they're looking for some advice or counsel from either their personal side or the professional side. So, all right, that's going to do it for us today. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. With us today has been Chris Mann. He is the former city manager for the city of Yucaipa, California, and he's the current city manager for Wildomar, California. If you like the content, please hit that follow or subscribe button on your platform of choice. If you really want to show some love, please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. And don't forget to check out Chris Mann's podcast, Gov 360. I will link to it in the show notes. Catch you next week.